Gabby Press commentary on the last Refuge article NYC Communists to Seize Private Property by Sundance. Gabby Press. The ideological polarization in America is based upon the conflict between communist collectivism and white Western civilization individualism. January 6, 2026. Gabby Press introduction to last Refuge article on the communist seizure of private property in NYC. The communist seizure of private property in New York occurs in the same moment in U.S. economic history that the income and wealth gap between the rich and the middle class is growing. Economic research from visual capitalists Dorothy Neufeld shows U.S. household income distribution in 2024, based on data from the U.S. Census Bureau. The top 20% of U.S. citizens increased their share of income from 43% in 1974 to 52% in 2024. The communist ideological appeal to voters in New York is based upon the growing perception of young citizens that the American social contract is not fair and does not work for them. Voters supporting Mamdani are looking for some type of economic system that is better than the current system. On the other hand, the current social-political contract for wealthy U.S. citizens is working great for the uni-party political class. The problem Gabby Press addresses in this commentary is that red state citizens do not have a coherent ideology of the social benefits of market exchange that confronts the very attractive communist ideology of seizing private property. The attractive alternative to communist collectivism is the ethical values of white Western civilization. MAGA is a campaign slogan of President Trump, and is not a substitute for a political movement that would attract young voters to support an individualist market exchange economy. The growing gap between social classes is a real economic problem that cannot be solved with an imaginary political movement called MAGA. The so-called MAGA movement does not acknowledge the economic problem of the growing income gap, and MAGA does not offer young citizens a better economic growth strategy. The reason that Marxist Democrats continue to win elections in major metro regions, and may win the midterms in 2026, is the absence of a competitor ideology, or an alternative to the Democrat-Republican uni-party that addresses the growing income gap between the ruling class and the plebes. Snakehead was right, but for the wrong reason. It is the economy, stupid, but the U.S. economy does not work anymore for the benefit of middle and working class citizens, and young citizens see that reality. This growing gap in wealth in the American society is an existential threat to individual liberty, and the threat is going to get much worse with the coming of the unregulated corporate deployment of artificial intelligence economy that will destroy middle-class jobs. Excerpt from article Last Refuge article. NYC Mayor Zoran Mamdani's appointed tenant director advocates to seize private property and change to community property. Quote, all individually owned property to be part of a new collective property viewpoint as controlled by city government. For centuries we really treated property as an individualized good and not a collective good. In transitioning into treating it as a collective good and towards the model of shared equity, it will mean that families, especially white families, are going to have a different relationship to property than the one that we currently have. Home ownership as a weapon of white supremacy in a series of pro-communist social media posts. This is an election cycle that will determine whether the direction of this nation is toward individual rights and self-determination of abundance, or whether everyone is forced to cross the finish line of scarcity at the same exact moment. End quote. Gabby Press analysis and commentary on the economics of income polarization between the top 20% and the bottom 80%. The irreconcilable conflict between red state and blue state citizens reflects a difference of opinion over the proper constitutional function of the national government. James Buchanan, a Nobel laureate economist at George Mason University, outlined two essential constitutional functions of the national government. He cited the 1. Protective state, that protects individual natural rights and civil rights from concentrated political power, and 2. The productive state, which establishes the fair rules of cooperation for the work of a market economy, where all citizens have an equal opportunity for financial success. Gabby Press added two additional functions of the national government that limits and constrains the government to certain, written, enumerated powers. Beneficial Economics: A Red State Citizen's Guide to Crafting a Better Constitution When the Government Fails the Citizens. 3. The Entrepreneurial State, which decentralizes economic decision-making to metro regions and states. 4. The Sovereign State, which defends the national government from external and internal forces, which aim at eliminating national sovereignty. Part of the Gabby Press economic growth strategy described in Beneficial Economics is to modify and limit the function of private commercial banks, including the Fed, from being able to create both money and debt at the same time. The power of banks to create money and make loans would be limited to the use of loans to create real economic growth, called the Real Bills Doctrine, before 1913. The current U.S. central banking system creates periodic economic collapse, by design and intent, to benefit the most wealthy citizens and corporations, who are deemed individual citizens, in a series of misguided Supreme Court decisions. In the existing financial structure, since 1913, commercial banks create money, not economic growth. Banks create money out of nothing, when they issue loans and debt that create asset speculation and inflation. When private commercial banks issue credit, they pull future spending power into today to allow current consumers to purchase assets, which pumps up asset prices. The asset bubbles benefit the most wealthy social classes, who have the liquid funds to buy the assets at low values and sell assets at the higher inflated values. The asset bubble bursts, and ordinary common citizens are subjected to economic collapse, while the wealthy classes obtain government bailouts. Economic growth is measured by increases in GDP. In contrast to asset speculation bank loans, which do not create future economic growth, Gabby Press argues that only private capital investment creates future economic growth, when a portion of capital gains from existing companies is invested in new ventures. Economic growth is caused by private capital investment, not bank loans to existing businesses. Future economic growth creates upward economic opportunity for young citizens who are attracted to communism. The Gabby Press Red State Economic Solution to the Communist Appeal to Confiscate Private Property. An internet commenter, on Zero Hedge, named Po'boy, responded to the news of the communist confiscation of private property by making a useful distinction between the term capitalism and market exchange system. There are many forms of capitalism, and the current form in operation in the U.S. today is called global predatory capitalism, which is the cause of the growing gap in social class income. Po'boy writes, quote, "Just because capitalism tells you the optimal way to organize the means of production and labor doesn't mean you have to become a materialist or hedonist. Choosing your ultimate goal for living and working is a separate question. Capitalism says nothing about the rightness or wrongness of child labor, overtime, or unsafe working conditions." End quote. In other words, capitalism identifies who owns capital, but the system of capitalism is devoid of cultural moral values or ethical rules of how citizens treat each other, in an ethical market exchange system. As an example of this distinction, we cite a Zero Hedge article by Peter Chur, of Academy Securities, entitled ProSec 2026, which is short for Production Security, in the Domestic U.S. Economy. Chur goes through a morally neutral exposition of how production security would enhance future economic growth, without ever mentioning the issue of the growing income gap between social classes. His strategy for production security leaves the entire global corporate predatory capitalist system in place. He writes, "Production for security" refers to a strategy focusing on enhancing domestic production to ensure national security and economic resilience. It is expected to influence corporate and government decision-making significantly in 2026 and beyond. It aims to enhance national security by increasing domestic production, particularly in critical sectors. The ProSec economic system proposed by Chur looks remarkably like the state crony capitalist system of China. Chur writes, "All we need to do is look at how China has shaped their economy, and we have a pretty decent roadmap for what we, the U.S., need to do. It will vary by country, by company, and asset manager, but ProSec will be a dominant factor in 2026. A better economic strategy for economic growth which would be attractive to young citizens who are attracted to communism was proposed by both Henry Simons and Irving Fisher during the era of the creation of the Fed. Their solution was to limit commercial banks to making loans in the real bills doctrine and the additional step of eliminating monopoly economic power. A second zero-hedge commenter named Sound of the Suburbs summarized the Simon-Fisher economic growth strategy. Quote, eliminate all forms of monopolistic market power, to include the breakup of large oligopolistic corporations and application of antitrust laws to labor unions. A federal incorporation law could be used to limit corporation size, and where technology required giant firms for reasons of low-cost production, the federal government should own and operate them. Promote economic stability by reform of the monetary system and establishment of stable rules for monetary policy. Reform the tax system and promote equity through income tax. Abolish all tariffs. Limit waste by restricting advertising and other wasteful merchandising practices. Simons 1934a, end quote. The path forward for red state citizens and young citizens who are attracted to communism. The government has failed the citizens, and voting harder for the Uni Party is not the solution. The imaginary MAGA movement is not the solution. The ideological differences between citizens in red states and citizens in blue states are irreconcilable. The best, most peaceful solution is civil dissolution, and red states starting over at 1776, with a new constitution for red state citizens. As we write in Beneficial Economics, the new constitution would be based upon the cultural moral values and ethical rules established 2,500 years ago in Greek philosophy about the human relationship with God, generally called the spark within. The individualist philosophy of the new constitution would extend to early Christianity in the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary. The moral values of white Western civilization included in the new constitution: natural rights, the belief that individuals are endowed with inherent rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Self-reliance, the idea that individuals are responsible for their own success and well-being. Personal responsibility emphasizes accountability for one's actions and decisions. Individual liberty, the right to think, act, and express oneself freely without undue interference. Meritocracy, the belief that success is based on individual talent, effort, and achievement. Democratic principles of self-governance based on individual consent and participation. Pursuit of knowledge, valuing education, critical thinking, and intellectual exploration. Religious freedom, the right to practice one's faith without oppressive constraints. In other words, starting over today would look remarkably like what the Patriots had in mind for the new government in 1776, and that constitution would probably be more attractive to young American citizens than the communist expropriation of private property. About Gabby Press. Gabby is short for the Great American Business and Economics Press. Gabby is the imprint publisher of books and blogs about topics related to American economic liberty and how fair constitutional rules create mutually beneficial financial outcomes for middle and working class citizens. Our website offers an educational gathering place for ordinary common red state citizens to prepare for the urgent issues that confront the economic and political reality in the U.S. today. Read our free educational PowerPoints at our website. Buy our books direct from us at our website, www.gabbypress.com.